Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring webinar on using adaptive baseline assessment to improve your school's performance. I've got just a few housekeeping notes before I hand over to Suzanne. If you could swap the next slide, please, Suzanne. Thanks very much. So please note that your microphones are muted, so we can't hear any members of the audience, and this is to ensure good sound quality. But if you would like to ask questions, and please do ask questions, please post them in the questions sort of panel in the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can put them in the chat. Either way, we'll get to them. We'll answer your questions at the end of the webinar. You'll receive a certificate of attendance, which will be sent to your inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes. And you'll receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides, which will be sent to you via email next week. All right, that is everything for me. I'll hand over now to Suzanne, who's our assessment advisor at CHEM. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Suzanne Tipping, and as Megan kindly already said, I'm an assessment advisor at CHEM. So part of my role is to provide specialist knowledge about our baseline assessments, and I work closely with schools and colleges to support school improvement and assessment strategies. And my background is in teaching. I'm a former secondary school teacher of business, IT and economics. I've got 20 years experience in the classroom. I've also worked as a curriculum development coordinator for GCSE business and as a GCSE business examiner. And I've also had a pastoral role as a deputy head of year. And just a little bit about CHEM. So we are the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. We're actually celebrating our 40th birthday this year. We now operate in over 90 countries, and so we're one of the largest and longest established providers of baseline assessments for children from early years to post-16. And all of our methods are strongly based on research, they're evidence-driven and market-tested. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about our baseline assessments today, specifically for secondary schools. So at CHEM, we believe strongly in evidence, and we know how important it is in schools. We know that teachers are using evidence all of the time to transform learning for all of their students. And so we help teachers to turn data into knowledge, and we provide that gap between the educational research that we're doing at Cambridge University and the practice that's actually happening in schools. And we provide evidence through our baseline assessments to provide you with data that will help to support good decision making in schools. And we have tools that allow you to do that. We provide lots of guidance in the form of teacher handbooks, and also we provide support from people like myself, the assessment advisors at CHEM. So what are our baseline assessments? Well, David's going to tell you some specific information about our baseline assessments today, but they are computer adaptive tests, and he'll explain exactly what makes them adaptive and how that works. So they're relevant to all learners. And our baseline assessments will measure a range of cognitive abilities and skills, and they don't require any preparation in class. They don't require any teaching beforehand. But what they do is they provide data that will help schools to understand their learners, to understand their ability and their potential. So the tests aren't curriculum based, they're not competitive or summative, but they do provide a snapshot of their baseline abilities. So you would deliver the assessments in schools, and that they are just quite short assessments. They're designed to fit into a lesson, so they only take about 50 minutes. They're adaptive and they're computer based, so there's no marking or additional workload for teachers. And then once the assessments have taken place, they will generate reports for you, and those reports will provide data that you're able to compare over time. They'll help you understand what progress has been made by students in your school, and they'll provide school leaders with forecasts for future attainment. Our reports do provide predictions for GCSEs and IGCSEs, and our ALICE assessments in sixth form will provide predictions for A-level as well. And once you've got that data and you understand where your students are at, what their ability levels are and what their potential is, it will help you to facilitate monitoring and quality assurance and make sure that your priority strategies are achieved. And also, it will allow you to validate schools' internal attainment and progress data as well. So who might use the data from our baseline assessments in school? It can be used by a range of staff in schools and people in the wider school community as well. So for example, if you are part of a multi-academy trust, then it might be used by directors and senior leaders at MAT level. So you might use standardized assessments and scores across all of your schools within the trust. And it will just mean that you're using a standardized method to assess your students. And it'll help you to identify strengths and weaknesses across the multi-academy trust. And this can be useful when allocating resources and also in helping you identify opportunities to share good practice between your schools. Within individual schools, it might be used by senior leadership teams for a range of different reasons. So for example, you can use our predictive data to look at potential exam performance across a year group. You can use it to help develop evidence-driven intervention strategies for students in school and allocate resources. So for example, maybe there's an area where you want to introduce a tuition program where you need to strengthen your students' abilities. And that can help you aid HR planning in terms of the teachers and the support staff that you employ, and plan CPD for your existing staff. And it can also be used to calculate value added after GCSEs have taken place. So a heads of year might use it on a pastoral level. So you can use the baseline assessment data to identify students who are perhaps not fulfilling their potential. You can also find out who's really pushing themselves to the limit and perhaps overachieving and exceeding expectations. So reward can be put in place where appropriate, but also encouragement and support to the right students. On a subject level, heads of departments, subject leads for particular subjects might find it useful as well. You'll be able to understand the ability levels of students who are taking your subject, and you might use the data to develop your long-term planning. So perhaps with your schemes of learning, you might introduce activities that will include the right support and challenge based on the ability levels of your students that you've got in the classes within your subject area. And of course, teachers of a particular subject can use the student profiles to find out what the students are capable of in their class. So you know what your expectations are in terms of target grades in your subject area for your students. But also you can use it to develop differentiated resources for your class that will be appropriate to each of your students. From a SENCO or the point of view of a support assistant and teaching assistants too, the baseline assessment can provide a preliminary screening for additional learning needs. So although it's not diagnostic of specific learning difficulties in any way, it can identify areas where students are struggling. And so it can really help support staff understand exactly what support the students need, whether that be in the form of group or one-to-one intervention. Our data can be shared with students, so we have certain reports that we say we would advise that you can use with students. One of those is a report which shows chances graphs for different subject areas, and that shows the students what chance they have of achieving different grades in specific subject areas. And this can be used to help them make appropriate subject choices. If they can see which areas they're likely to be more successful in, they can use that information alongside thinking about which ones they really enjoy and they really like to make choices about what GCSEs And it's some sort of parent report, which can be easily understood by all parents, which explains what our baseline assessments are. And they also explain, yes, sorry? Hello?
Sorry, the audio cut out for a second. Could you start over with the students section? Sorry.
Yes, yes, no problem at all. Sorry about that. Yeah, so yes, some of the data can be shared with students. So we do have a report which has chances graphs, and it shows what probability there is for achieving a particular grade in a particular subject for the students. So they might use this to help them make subject choices. If they can see which GCSEs and A-levels they're likely to be more successful in, then they can use this information alongside, thinking about which subjects they enjoy and which subjects are appropriate to their future choices to decide which subjects they're going to take. And also some of our reports are designed for parents as well. So they're written in plain English. They explain exactly what our baseline assessments are. They explain why we assess certain areas, which my colleague David will be talking about in a moment. And so they know exactly why they're being assessed in certain areas. And this helps them to understand why the assessment's being done and how the data can be used to support them in all of the ways that I've mentioned above. So I'm going to pass on to my colleague David now, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about our secondary baseline assessments.
Thank you, Suzanne. So if I show my screen, can you all see my screen okay there?
Yes, we can, David.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'm David, and I'm going to talk about, for the next half hour or so, I'm going to talk about the baseline assessments that we have available for pre-16 age students. So we have the MIDGES test, which is available for students from 11 to 14 age range. YELIS is available for 14 to 16-year-old students. So the assessments themselves are very similar, and we're going to have a little look. I've got some examples of the kind of questions that the students will see. So we will get to those as we move through the webinar. So these are baseline tests. The majority of schools who will be using the assessments will be having their students take the assessment as early as possible at the start of the academic year. You know, I always think the sooner the assessment is taken, the sooner you have access to the data, the more you're going to be able to get from that data. So these are formative assessments, and it really is all about giving you information about where your students are at that particular point in time, where they might be stronger, where they might need that little bit of additional support. So we're going to give you a measure of each student's aptitude for learning. What is their potential as well? So this is a big part of the pre-16 feedback, is those predictions to high-stakes subject exams. There isn't any subject content in the baseline assessments themselves. You know, the baseline assessments are there to give a measure of the developability, capacity to learn of the student, but we can take that score and we can look at the potential, what kind of grades we have seen similar baseline ability students achieve when they have taken high stakes subject exams. But we've got more about that coming up. So it is going to allow you to look at the impact that you are having on your students as they progress through school. And they are low stakes, you know, there's nothing to be worried about. When the students do these tests, there's no pass, there's no fail. It's very much just designed to give teachers a way of identifying the abilities of their students. That's really what we're looking to find out. So let's have a little look at the key features of the MIDGES and YELIS baseline assessments. So as we said, they are low stakes, computer adaptive. There's no sound, so we don't need to worry about having headphones or anything like that. All students who take the assessment should have exactly the same experience when they do the test itself. We get example questions at the start of each section to make sure that the students know how they are to answer the real questions when the section starts, but certainly everybody should have virtually the same experience when they do the assessment itself. So we do have an additional time version available as well. So the standard time version is going to last around about 55 minutes. Yellis is a little bit shorter, 45 minutes of testing time for Yellis, but there are 25% more time versions available as well. So any students who would get extra time in any other kind of task they might do within school, they can have the extra time version assigned to them. And it's really all about making sure that everybody has an equal chance of doing well, showing you what they can do within the test itself. We don't want anybody to be disadvantaged because they take a little bit longer to process instruction or anything like that. Those students can do the extra time version, and hopefully that will enable them to do as well as they can within the test itself. They are single assessments, so they are taken in one go, and they do include adaptive but also non-adaptive sections, and the overall aim is to provide that measure of the developed ability of a student. And then, as we've mentioned already, a big part of the report, when we start and have a look at the reports, is the predictions and chances graphs that we can look at. And that simply uses the results for previous students who have those two common data points. They have a Chem baseline score and a resultant final high stakes subject exam. It's their data that we can then use to predict potential exam grades for new baseline testing students. Okay, we've mentioned computer adaptive a couple of times already, so let's just have a little look at what we mean by that. So a computer adaptive assessment can react to the answers that the student provides. We have algorithms that are working in the background. You never see the algorithms, but they are there and they're working throughout. They're looking at the answers that the students give and choosing the most appropriate difficulty question to present the students with. The starting question you will see will be an average difficulty question for whatever cohort you might be in. So if you're a year 7 student, aged between 11 and 12 years old, your first question that you see is going to be an average difficulty year 7 question. Every question after that is going to be dependent on the answers that you give. So if you're doing really well, getting lots of questions right, those questions will be increasing in difficulty as you go through. But the reverse is also true. If we do start to get questions wrong, the assessment is going to recognize that and it's going to maybe present you with slightly easier questions. But it will certainly allow the students to show exactly what they can do. Because, yeah, you know, the questions really do get pretty difficult. I'll be honest, they do get beyond my maths ability. It's a bit of a worry for me how quickly we move away from my maths ability, but certainly it's really interesting. Think about a paper test. You know, paper tests are never going to be able to react to the answers that the students give. An adaptive test, you shouldn't get bored while you're doing the test because it's going to challenge you. You know, even if you're doing really well, it's going to present you with, you know, challenging questions, certainly. Okay, so just to put that into a little bit of a graphic, so here's our graphic to describe this a little bit. So there's my first question, It's an average difficulty question for my age. Every question beyond this first one is now going to be dependent on the answers that we give. So this is where the algorithm starts to work. So imagine this is me going through the test. I'm getting questions right, so those questions are getting progressively more difficult until we maybe hit a point where we get a question wrong. Now, we're not going to panic at this stage and jump right back. We're going to say, okay, we've got a question wrong, but let's pitch the next question a similar difficulty level. But if we get this question wrong, now the algorithm starts and thinks, yeah, okay, maybe we are reaching the upper difficulty question that this particular student can actually cope with. But again, we're not going to jump too far back. We're going to pitch the next question just a little bit easier than the last one we got right. If we get this one right, the process will continue until we start to see more consistent wrong answers, and that's where we would have the ability of the student determined. So the students do need to have attempted enough questions to give the algorithms enough information to work with. If you only answer 5 or 6 questions within a section, it's not really giving the algorithm enough data to work with. So, you're probably looking at about 14, 15 questions. Ideally, will give the algorithms enough data to come to a confident measure of where that student is at that particular point. Now, a little bit before we have a look at a few example questions, I thought we'd just describe what the component parts of the assessments are. So we've got midgets, 11 to 14, we've got yellows, 14 to 16 age range. So both assessments include an adaptive vocabulary and an adaptive maths section. So those two sections will react to the answers that the students give. The vocab in the standard time version will last for 10 minutes. The maths in the standard time version will last for 25 minutes. When the maximum time is reached, the section will stop and it will move on to the next section. So the timings are designed to time out for the average student. So you might get some students who potentially will finish the section within the allowed time. They would move on to the next section, but the majority of students, it will actually time out before they have seen all possible questions, but it is meant to work like that. So we have vocab and maths are common to both midgets and yellows. For midgets, we then have an additional skills section, which includes proofreading, and it includes speed and accuracy. Remember, examples coming up. These sections are fixed, so everything after maths are fixed, so all students would see the same questions. Maybe not at exactly the same time, but they will all see the same questions in the latter sections of each test. Midgets also includes a non-verbal, which has cross-section questions, block counting, and pictures. And yellows, we have adaptive vocab and adaptive maths, and then we've got a non-adaptive patterns that includes matching pictures, reflections, and rotations. So vocab and maths obviously are really good. Vocab and maths ability is a really good indicator for future attainment. Each one of those measures on their own would be a really good indicator of how a student could do when they do final high-stakes subject exams, but combined, they actually provide an even stronger indicator. So it is the vocab and maths adaptive sections that make the overall midget score and the overall yellow score. And it's the overall score that we use to predict future possible exam results. But the non-adaptive sections provide us with a little bit of additional information. So the skills section, it's looking for things that are maybe not as important these days, because we all have mobile phones, we all have tablets, iPads and everything that will correct your spelling for you as you're going through. So, you know, it's maybe not, we maybe don't have those skills now the way that we maybe did certainly back when I was at school, when we didn't have anything like this. But also being able to work quickly, it's really good skills to have when it comes to final exam performance. The non-verbal, good measure of 3D visualization, spatial aptitude, pattern recognition, things like that, and similar things that we're looking to find out about in the pattern section of the Yellis assessment as well. Now, an interesting feature of the non-adaptive sections is that the students will now see how long they've got left. Okay, so we do get instruction and we're told how long the adaptive sections will last. You know, we get told 10 minutes to do the vocab, 25 minutes to do the maths, but we don't see how long we've got left. We do get, I think it's about a 2-minute warning when we're getting close to the maximum allowed time, but we don't see the time ticking away. But we do in the non-adaptive sections. Now, that in itself, I think, is really interesting. You know, it's good to see how we've coped with that. Because it doesn't matter how many times I demonstrate these assessments, when I get to the non-adaptive sections, even though I've seen them all many times before, you still can't help but look at how long you've got left, and that brings its own bit of additional pressure. So I think it's really good to be aware of that when you're looking at the results that the students have achieved in those non-adaptive sections. Because it is going to give us an idea not only about how well they did in the section, but maybe also how have they coped with that time pressure. You know, have they been able to ignore the ticking clock and just approach the questions the way they would, you know, usually? Or have they just let the ticking clock influence them too much and rushed, you know, guessed answers and everything, because maybe they just don't have the skills yet. They struggle when it comes to working under quite acute time pressure. So it's good to be aware of that, because if you don't possess those skills, if you don't possess good time management skills, now's a really good time to be aware of that, because we can then maybe put things in place to try and improve our skills, because it's a skill that we're going to need to have. Think about final high-stakes subject exams. They don't last an infinite amount of time. We do have to complete the exam within the allowed time. And even beyond that, we all have to do things within a certain amount of time. So if that's a skill that you don't have, working quickly, working accurately, the sooner we're aware of that, the more that we can do to maybe try and bring those skills on. So really interesting feature of those non-adaptive sections. Okay, let's have a little look at some screenshots of some of the example questions that we have. So the vocabulary, we know that this is an adaptive section. So we have a target. It can be a picture, it could be a word, or it could be a phrase, and then we've got 4 possible answer options, and we're simply choosing which one of those answer options is the closest in meaning to whatever our target might be. So we've got an expression here to leave. Which of those 4 answer options basically means the same thing? We then move on to the maths, where we've got a mixture. Some questions will again be multiple choice. The answer, just pick the answer you think is the right one. Or we could be asking the students to type their answer into an answer box. Okay, so the example questions, the students will be told the answer to the example question if they actually get it wrong. Okay, the example questions are purely to make sure that the student knows how they are to provide their answer when the real question starts. So we don't want anybody to be stuck on the example question because they don't know the answer to it. So if you get the example question wrong, it will actually tell you what the right answer is, and then you can move on to the real questions. So after the maths section, for the midges test, we then move into the skills. So we start with proofreading. We've got a passage of text. We are told, again, we do get an example question at the start. Tells us the kind of mistakes we're looking for. We're looking for spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, things like that. When the actual real paragraph, the first genuine paragraph, is actually presented to us, we have a minute in the standard time version to find as many mistakes as we can. And we just highlight where we think the mistake is. If we highlight something by mistake, we can always click on it and it would take the highlight off. But we've got a minute in the standard time version to find as many mistakes as we can before it will move on to the next paragraph. Then we have the speed and accuracy. Again, we've got a target on the left-hand side. The target could be numbers, it could be characters, or it could be symbols. And then we're looking for the match from the 4 possible options. And we've got about 2 minutes to do 26 of these. So we're looking for fairly rapid responses as we go through. The final section of the midges test is the nonverbal. So we have cross sections in this example question. Imagine a shape with a piece of glass passed through the middle. We flip it on the side. What would the cross section look like? Is our target cross section a cross section of one of the shapes that we can see? The block counting. We have a series of shapes that will be made up of small blocks and large blocks. We could be asking how many small blocks have been used to make the shape, how many large blocks, but we could also ask how many small blocks could you have used to make the same shape. Okay, we can see 2 small blocks have been used there, but we could equally make the same shape if we used 5 small blocks. And we might also be asking you to try and visualize what's happening. If we've got a bigger shape, you might only be able to see one angle view. You might be having to try and visualize what's happening round the back of a shape, say, and then to, determine how many small blocks possibly could have been used, even though we can't see the complete 360-degree view of the shape. And then the final section is pictures. So we're adding a picture, add the left-hand picture to the right-hand one. What would the result be from those 4 possible answer options? If we were to look at a sequence, what's happening in the sequence and what would be the natural next picture if that sequence was to keep going? And subtracting, if we took the left-hand picture away from the right-hand picture, what would we end up with? Now, the yellows, we know that we have adaptive vocabulary and maths, and we've got this non-adaptive pattern, so we're looking for matching. First example here, we've got a checkerboard and 4 possible matches. Just tell me which one you think is the correct match. Reflections, imagine we have a shape pass through a mirror. What would the reflected image look like? Rotations, the angle will always be 90 degrees, but the shape will be different. So if we were to rotate the shape, whatever that shape might be, this example, we've got the arrow rotated through 90. Which of those answer options would be the correct picture after that rotation has actually taken place? Okay, so that's the actual midges and Yellis assessments. So remember, adaptive sections where the questions will increase or decrease in difficulty depending how we're doing. And then we've got those non-adaptive sections where all students will see the same questions, but probably not at exactly the same time. So once the assessments have been taken, I probably should have mentioned as well, actually, that the assessments are available as fully online or fully offline assessments. So the majority of schools these days will be using the fully online versions, but there is a plan B. So if there are any concerns about the bandwidth connection between wherever you might be and where we are. If there's any concerns about that, schools can download the software. It would download onto your network and you would be able to run them from your network as well. So that takes away the concern if you have any concerns about doing them fully online. The assessments themselves are exactly the same. They work in exactly the same way. It's just what you would do prior to testing is just a little bit different with the offline version than it is with the fully online version. But once the assessments have been taken, within a couple of hours, if you've done the fully online version, you will be able to see feedback. And the kind of feedback that we get standardized scores, which will compare your students to other students who've taken the same test. We've got that average score of 100. Anything above 100 or below 100 would indicate an above average or below average score. We've got the visual attainment profiles, which takes the data that we have in the standardized scores table and just puts it in a more visual form. We have the latest report for parents and carers. This is new for pre-16 assessments. This is the first academic year that this has actually been available. So I've got examples of some of these reports coming up. We've got the cohort profiles, so take a step back and look at the group, maybe rather than looking at an individual student. Predictions and chances, as we said, a very big reason why schools use the pre-16 baseline assessments is to get an indication of potentially what their students will achieve when they take high-stakes subject exams. And then the final piece of the puzzle is value added. So if we can predict to a high stakes subject exam, the student takes the exam, the school return their achieved result to us. We can compare what we thought the student would achieve against what they actually did, and that's value added. Okay, so value added is reported at the student level, but also at the school and subject level as well. Okay, so here's an example of the parent report. So we have this available for Midges and Yellis. We have a little bit about the test itself. So this example here gives me a little bit of information about what the Midges test is. We've got a few screenshots to give an example of what the vocabulary questions look like, what the maths questions look like, the nonverbal and skills. And then we've got probably the most important part is how the student actually performed in the test itself. So I've got my example student here, and we can see we've got a breakdown of those 4 sections of the test: the vocab, the maths, the nonverbal, and the skills. We've got working towards expectation, we've got score in line with expectation, and we've got a score above expectation there. So we can see Ricardo here, above expectation, his score when he did the vocab questions, but all other sections of the test was basically where we would hope he actually would be. So it's given us that little bit of additional information, something to give to parents should they ask, you know, my son came home from school, mentioned a test he'd done, I'm interested in what the test was actually all about. So this will give you something to share with parents if you want to. Okay. Now the standardized scores table. So this is really answering the question, how did my students score in the test? So for the teachers, that's going to be really important. You know, you want to know how your students scored. Were there any areas where they scored especially high? You know, remember 100 indicates a completely average score. If you were above 100, below 100, that's going to indicate whether we're above average or below average. we use a standard deviation of 15, which allows us to categorize our results a little bit, so 85 to 115, that's where the majority of student scores will actually be. So it's good to be able to have that information, reporting a standardized score for each section of the tested as well. Make sure that you're not missing anything. You might have a good overall midget score in this example, but do we have consistent scores across all of the sections? Okay, because this is going to flag up, we might have a student who has scored really high in some of the sections, but other sections, they have struggled. So this is making sure that you've got that complete 360-degree profile of how the student performed in that assessment itself. So if we look at this example table here, if you look at my fourth student down, we've got 150 vocab score. That's a really high. It doesn't go any higher than 150. So there's a really good vocab scoring student here. But look at their maths result, look at their non-verbal results, and look at their skills results. That's given us an indication, really good vocab ability for the student. We've got a decent overall score there, 118, but there's definitely work potentially to be done in the math section, in the non-verbal set, and in the skills as well. Otherwise, is this student going to be able to fulfill the potential that their maybe strong vocabulary ability is actually showing us? Okay, so this is basically me doing the tests to give a little bit of data to use during webinars like this. And I did say at the start of the webinar that maths isn't my strong point, and this probably tells us a little bit more about that. So yeah, but if this was genuine data, then it's going to be really useful to have that kind of information. So we have the visual attainment profiles. You might be somebody who likes tables of numbers. So we have the table of data there, but we've also got these individual student records as well. So this takes our data and presents it in a little more, in a bit more of a visual way. So we have two year 10 students. So these two students took a year 10 Yellis baseline test. They both achieved the same overall Yellis score of 115. So the question I would be asking myself, surely their ability profile is going to look the same because they did both achieve the same score. Well, not necessarily so. Because the overall score is only using the adaptive sections, we could potentially have a situation like the one we can see here. One student with a much higher vocab ability than maths, the other student is almost the mirror opposite, a lower vocab ability and a higher maths score, yet they both still have the same overall score. So having that breakdown, providing a standardized score for all of the sections as well is really useful. Again, it's just making sure that you're not missing anything that might be hidden by an overall good result. So we have the cohort profiles as well. Not really going to talk too much about this, but it's just a way of looking at the abilities of the group. And this is a historical band profile, so we can see our results for our current year, and then we can compare those to the previous cohorts that we've had through as well. So it's going to give us an idea, are we seeing any trends developing in the ability of the students that are coming into my school? And the final thing, before we have a very quick look at value added, I just want to talk about predictions. So this is looking at potential future subject exam performance based on the average performance in the past of students who have those two data points, a Chem baseline and a corresponding high stakes subject exam. And the chances graphs will give us the percentage probability of a different grade being achieved. So this is basically how we do it. If you imagine for every subject that we can predict to, we have a chart like this. Every one of those stars is a genuine final achieved subject grade for whatever subject this might be. So this could be history. So each one of those stars is a genuine history grade that has been achieved by a student who has a corresponding Chem baseline. So we put a regression line through the middle of our data where we've got roughly half of our genuine results above and below the line. So imagine I have a student who has achieved 120 in their baseline test, so say 120 in the midges test. This would be their predicted grade for history. And we reach that grade by going up from 120. Where we cross the green line, that's by far the most popular achieved grade for that starting point. But we can see as we travel towards the green line, we actually go through students who achieved a lower grade. And if we kept going beyond the green line, we will be going through students who actually achieved a higher grade. And that's where chances graphs come into it, because that's not the only possible outcome. You know, when you walk into that exam room, every grade is available. So the chances graphs are designed to give an idea. We might think that you are more likely, based on your assessment, baseline assessment ability, we might think you're more likely to achieve one grade, but there's nothing to stop you achieving a higher grade, because similar baseline ability students have in the past, but also some students have also achieved a lower grade. So, you know, we don't just have to turn up in the exam in order to achieve a particular grade. We've got to put the effort in. If we actually really put some effort in and have a really good revision program, we could be one of the students who achieves a higher grade. But if we do allow ourselves to be distracted before we go into that final exam and not put the effort in, then we could be one of the students who actually achieves a lower grade. So chances graphs are really all about looking at the percentage probability of every possible grade being achieved. And then the very final thing is just to have a very quick description here about what we talk about when it comes to value added. It's going to allow you to answer questions: have my students fulfilled their subject potential? Have any subjects achieved, have subjects achieved their potential grades? Distributions: is there any subjects where on average the students actually achieved higher grades? Any subjects where the students actually achieve lower grades? Is there any best practice to be shared? Has a subject who achieved really positive value added, have they been doing something different? And is that something that other subjects potentially could try to see whether they can see the same kind of benefits? So value added will be reported at individual, but also at the subject level and the school level as well. So that was as far as I was going to go. I hope that's given an idea as to what the Midges and Yellis tests actually look like and the kind of reports that you actually get back from them. So I'll pause now and just see whether we've had any questions come in.
Great, thanks very much, David, and thanks, Suzanne. Let me just have a quick look. Yep, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please either put them in the questions or the chat functionality and go to webinar. There is a question about are there any adaptations for people with reading needs?
Right, okay, so I suppose it will depend on the kind of reading need that we're actually talking about there. You do have the extra time version, and certainly in the past we've always said, you know, if a student would have a reader with them when they were doing any other kind of task within, you know, any other kind of exam or anything like that within school, that the same level of help, the same level of support can be provided when these baseline tests are being taken as well. You know, remember, these are low stakes tests. You know, the results are not going to follow you through the rest of your life. It's all about giving schools and giving teachers meaningful data about their students. So if a student needs a little bit of additional support when they're doing the assessment, as long as, you know, the support doesn't stray into, you know, influencing the answer or anything like that, I don't really see anything wrong with allowing, you know, whatever supports potentially a student might need in order to allow them to you know, access the test and complete the assessment itself.
Thank you, David. There's a question here that might be more for Suzanne, although happy for either of you to answer it. It's whether you have any examples of schools putting the assessment data into practice.
Yes, yeah, absolutely we do. We always encourage feedback from our schools, and we love to hear how they're using the data. I'm actually in the process of setting up some secondary networks of schools who use our Chem baseline assessments, and that's going to give us the opportunity to sort of run some like data workshops with them, and so that people from Chem can talk to them about the different things that we do, but also so that we can hear them share good practice with each other and share their ideas about how they use the data. But also, you know, we sometimes have schools that carry out case studies for us as well and tell us in detail how they're using the data. So there's a school that won't mind me sharing their name, Mackey Academy, who said to us that they are, you know, they choose the most meaningful data. So there's a wide range of reports that they can access, but there are certain ones that they find specifically useful, and they use it to complement and support tracking and monitoring systems in their school that they currently have, and that the most useful part for them they found was the predictive data for GCSE, and what they found is that when they have actually compared it to their actual GCSE data, or even sort of mock exams that students have done before that they've been very accurate for them. So they find that data really useful. But they've also used it on an individual level as well with certain students. So they did have a student who had a wide range of additional needs, and they needed a lot of support in school generally. But they used the chances graph to provide a really tailored curriculum for him based on the mid-year feedback. And they chose subjects together that would be, he'd be most likely to achieve a higher grade in, and that, you know, although he had all those additional needs, he had a really good chance of achieving a good set of grades, which would help him, you know, achieve what he wanted to in the future and move on to that course that he wanted to do. And they've also used those predictions to share with staff, you know, just to encourage them to really challenge him, to show them what he was capable of, and just challenge him that bit further. And also, you know, that's something else that they said, that engaging really purposefully with staff has been really successful for them, and they make sure that all of their teaching staff understand what the data means and how they can use it in their everyday practice to provide support and challenge in the areas that the students most need it.
Yeah, thank you. That's brilliant, Suzanne. I'll be sure to include the Mackey Academy case study that Suzanne was talking about in the follow-up alongside the slides and the recording from today. So if you want to have a look in a bit more detail, then you're very welcome to. I think that's probably all of the questions that have come through. It's probably just for me to say a big thank you to Suzanne and David for presenting today, and for all of you for attending. Hope you found it useful and informative. We'll be sending the slides and the recording around within the next week or so, but if you've got any questions in the meantime or anything that pops into your head after the webinar, please feel free to get in touch by emailing cem, that's CEM, at cambridge.org, and we'll be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. So we'll end it there. Thank you for coming, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.